Hi guys, how's it going? Ivano here with another tier list video. So you might have already seen my single target tier list and best classes for AoE damage tier list, maybe even the survivability tier list. So today we're going to be putting them all together and we will rank the best DPS classes for general play, more focused on Warzones in the current patch. If you want to know something about a particular class, you can check the description below, where I will put link to the chapters, so then you can jump forward to the bits that really interest you. To explain the methodology of how exactly I rank these classes, I basically rated every spec in the game in 3 categories. The first one and most important one would be damage, where I rated every spec on a scale of 0 to 10 points. Then survivability as the second category, I gave a maximum of 8 points for the best specs. But then there's a third dimension that we didn't rank so far, and that would be something that I call utility. Now, utility is kind of a new element to this tier list, and it can include everything such as the ability to off-heal. So the DPS that can not only heal themselves, but heal their teammates. That can include taunts, that can include other kinds of peels such as knockbacks, other forms of CC such as hard stuns, and I give this category a total of 5 points. So without further ado, let's jump into the tier list, starting with the currently worst spec for 8v8 Warzones in my opinion, and that is the Concealment Operative. Concealment Operative struggles. It has, on the damage side, only a score of 4 out of 10, mostly because its AoE damage is pretty much non-existent, and it really struggles with the current amount of roots that are in the game. So it cannot apply the good single target damage that it has to specs such as Madness or Lethality. On the survivability side, Concealment lacks DR. I gave it 5 points out of 8 because it does have the God roll and can vanish, which is very useful, but not more than that. On the utility side, unfortunately, I think Concealment is also the worst class in the game. It does have a hard stun, but not much else. The HOTS that it has are weaker than Lethality. You can take Flashbang for CC, but then you don't have your Holo Traverse, which you really need for mobility and the root break. And of course, Concealment doesn't have a taunt. So unfortunately, only 1 point for utility, which puts Concealment in D tier with a total of 10 points. Next up, we're getting already to C tier. And as the second worst spec in the game currently, I have Arsenal Mercenary. Now, Arsenal Mercenary, we already talked about the damage, which is not great, survivability, which is a bit better, but not among the top specs in the game, rated for 3 points for damage and 5 for survivability. When it comes to utility and peels, however, Arsenal is one of the better specs in the game. The Arsenal has possibility to root, which it can take at level 73. It's actually on a very short cooldown. It does have a knockback, of course. It has Electronet, which is a great CC. It does have off heals, but they are kind of meh, they're not that great. However, Arsenal does have CC in Concussion Missile, and it's baseline, so you don't have to talent it. You have the possibility to take Electro Dart as a 4-second hard stun, but you never really do. And other classes have it baseline, so I would say Arsenal is not among the best utility specs in the game, but you're probably somewhere in A tier. I give it 4 points. Simply because it does have that very annoying 70% passive rotational slow on Blazing Bolts. And if you play melee and you have been taken on a walk like a dog by an Arsenal Merc, then you know how strong that slow can be. So overall, I would give it 4 points for utility for a total of 12 points, which puts Arsenal in C tier. Next up, a quick one, IO Merc. So IO Merc pretty much has 4 points for damage, 5 points for survivability. So a little bit better on the damage side, in my opinion. And then for utility and peels, I gave it 3 out of 5, simply because IO does not have the same 70% slow that Arsenal has. Overall, I would say, though, both specs are pretty similar. I would probably slightly prefer Innovative Ordnance right now. But they're pretty close. Both of them have a total of 12 points. Next up, the third spec with 12 points in my list would be the Marksmanship Sniper. Now, Marksmanship, like all sniper specs, can take Ballistic Shield, which is great for utility, great for group play. It does have knockback that comes with a baked-in root. Diversion is very nice to peel for your teammates. But the downside of Sniper is that it doesn't have CC. So no more flashbang. The hard stun, you cannot really take it because then you will be without a defensive cooldown in countermeasures, which is just too important. Obviously, Sniper as a pure DPS class does not have a taunt, and it also has no ability to heal itself or its teammates. So overall, on the utility side, I can only give it 2 out of 5 points, which brings it to a total of 12 points. Next in the list, and still in C tier with a total of 13 points, I have the Hatred Assassin. Hatred Assassin scored pretty highly on the damage score, even though it has a hard time applying the damage to targets. However, on the survivability side, I think it is probably the squishiest spec in the game right now. When it comes to utility, I can only give it really 2 points out of 5. While it does have taunts and a hard stun, and you can talent the AoE knockback route with Overload, one thing that holds it back is that your mass taunt is actually your best defensive cooldown. That being said, you have to choose whether you want to use it for damage reduction or whether you want to taunt the enemies. And sometimes you want to do the one thing, but also the other, and then it can be a bit weird. What else does Hatred have? It has, of course, the root on Creeping Terror on your dot, and then it has Force Slow for CC, but yeah, so it's worse than Deception, for example, because Deception gets the slow passively baked into the rotation if you're taking the talent, and for Hatred, using Force Slow is simply a DPS loss. Then again, it's only 6 seconds, so it's not that great in terms of slows. Has, of course, no off heal, and also not really a possibility to take Whirlwind, because you really need Shroud to make Hatred at all playable. So utility-wise, not that great of a spec. A total of 13 power points, simply because the damage potential is a bit higher as those lower specs, but still in C tier. So not one of the best specs right now. Next on my list, I have the Annihilation Marauder, or Watchman Sentinel. I gave it 4 points for damage and 6 for survivability, so survivability-wise it is quite high. On the side of utility, it doesn't have much, like all Marauder specs. It has been quite severely nerfed with the pruning of 7.0. Annihilation does have Predation, which is by itself one of the best utility skills in the game, giving all your team 80% movement speed, as well as 10% passive defense chance. So that's really strong, and I think just for having Predation, I would already give it 2 points when it comes to utility. But then also Annihilation, of course, has its group heals when its dots are active during Berserk. In total, I would give it 3 out of 5 points for utility. That brings it to a total of 13 points and puts it at the top of C tier. Moving on to B tier. First spec I have on the list is the Vengeance Juggernaut. Now, Vengeance has Intercede, which is great as a mobility skill, but also for utility since it reduces damage that your teammate takes. Vengeance, of course, has taunts. It kept its hard stun baseline, which is very good, and also has the possibility to talent into a myriad of routes, which can be really annoying. Of course, Vengeance also, as all Juggernauts, have Force Push, which is great for trolling people in Void Star or peeling for your teammate. On the downside, Vengeance does not have a lot of heals and also not much in terms of slows. So I gave it a total of 3 utility points out of 5. And if you watch my last tier list, you will know that I rate Vengeance damage very highly, 7 out of 10. But on the survivability side, it is on par with Hatred, and there I would only give it 4 out of 8 points. For a total of 14 power points for Vengeance, which puts it at the bottom of B tier. Next up, another spec that is playable but is kind of middle of the pack in most situations is the Virulence Sniper. Virulence has, on the utility side, pretty much the same thoughts as Marksman Sniper, with the difference that Virulence also gets the AoE slow, the kind of puddle it leaves after it rolls. That makes it a little bit better, I guess. So I gave it a total of 3 points. Obviously, it's lacking taunts or heals, and on the CC, it is not that great either. So middle of the pack, 3 utility points. I gave it 6 out of 10 for damage and 5 out of 8 for survivability, for a total of 14 points. So on par of Vengeance, they might be pretty much interchangeable, but I think Virulence is more reliable, so I'm rating it slightly above. Next on my list, Deception Assassin. Deception Assassin might surprise some people. In some other tier lists, I've seen it anywhere from S to A tier. But if you've seen my last 2 tier lists, you will know why I rated only middle of the pack. Deception really struggles with not having any AoE whatsoever in a meta where AoE damage is really important. You really struggle if you're playing against a guard, and everyone is playing tank right now, so Deception cannot do much in that department. So I gave Deception a total of 5 points for damage and 6 points for survivability, which is among the better specs. When it comes to utility, Deception is actually also really good. I gave it 4 out of 5 points because it does have low slash, it does have 2 hard stuns with Maul Spike and Electrocute, it does have taunts, which are great, it can take knockback, of course then trading in one of the hard stuns, but the AoE knockback with a baked-in root and overload is great. You're not really taking Whirlwind, so that takes a little bit away from the spec in the CC department. What gives it another plus, though, is that it has the rotational slow baked in to Voltaic Slash if you're taking the right talent. That slow is actually bugged, and it stacks up to 70% instead of, I think, the 30 or 50% that it says in the talent tree. So really strong slow. That's part of your normal rotation. So that's quite good. However, the AoE control of the spec is not great. It's more a single target spec, both when it comes to damage and control. And I couldn't give it 5 points because usually you will be using your low slash to gap close and catch up to those pesky sorcerers, meaning that then you don't have it available for CC on the healer, for example. Moving on, close to Deception but slightly above it, I have the PyroPT. PyroPT, in terms of utility, of course, has taunts, it has Carbonize, which it can reset to have a shorter cooldown when it gets hit. It has Pull, which is really great, but unfortunately, Pyro, of course, has no off heals and not much in terms of roots. It does have an AoE slow with Searing Wave, but the hitbox of that one is not so great. What else does Pyro have? I guess you can choose Suppressive Tools as a talent, which gives you more passive slows and a 50% slow on Neural Dart. And theoretically, you can play Neural Trigger, but more often than not, you won't play that. You will play damage instead, play Superheated Fuel. But I think just for the pulls, the taunts, and the really short cooldown on Carbonize, which is the best hard stun in the game, I gave it a total of 4 points for utility, combining that with 6 points for damage and 5 for survivability. It is points-wise on par with Deception, but because you know me, I'm a PowerTech player. With a total of 15 points, I rank it slightly above Deception in the B tier. Moving on, Lightning Sorcerer. Now, Lightning Sorcerer got a total of 6 points for damage. Its AoE potential is really great. Single target, however, has been nerfed in the last patch, so 6 out of 10, not one of the best overall damage specs in the game. Survivability-wise, it's good, but not as good as Madness, 5 points there. When it comes to utility, however, Lightning is among the better specs. I give it 4 out of 5 points because Lightning is actually really good. So with a well-timed pull or extricate, you can save your teammates, you can bubble them. You do have your hard stun baseline, which is great. You also have the AoE knockback, which is nice. Lightning is also good because you have a passive rotational slow and the root backed into Thundering Blast and Chain Lightning, of course. So all in all, very good. A lot of crowd control, friendly pulls, knockbacks, hard stuns, and off heals, everything you want. However, you cannot really take Whirlwind, so that's one of the downsides. And another reason why I didn't give it 5 out of 5 points is that the heals are not as good as some of the other classes that are still to come above it. So with a total of 15 points out of a total possible 23, Lightning is very solidly in B tier. Next up, we have the second of the Marauder specs, namely the Fury tree. Fury also has a total of 15 points, out of which I put 6 out of 10 in damage, 7 out of 8 in survivability, and on the utility side, unfortunately, it falls a little bit short. Fury, as I already said, as all Marauders, has been really hit hard by the pruning of 7.0. You lost your AoE fear, you lost Obfuscate. The hard stun is now optional. You must take it, and if you choose it, then you lose either Mad Dash, which is really important for mobility, or Guarded by the Force. So yeah, that's annoying. So you don't really have anything in terms of CC. You cannot really peel for your teammates. I guess you do have an AoE slow in Saber Throw, but usability-wise, that's quite poor because it's only in a straight line and hard to hit many targets with it. The only other thing you have, of course, is Predation. But simply for Predation, I would already prefer a Fury Marauder to a Concealment Operative, which is why I gave Fury 2 points for utility for a total of 15 points. And I will put it slightly above Lightning in the B tier. Moving on, Carnage. So Carnage Marauder, I think, is right now the meta pick when it comes to Marauder. I see more people playing that than Fury. That being said, there's not much difference between the two specs, power-wise, in my opinion. Carnage, I gave it 6 points for damage, 7 for survivability, and also 2 for utility. Utility-wise, it's the same as Fury, but of course Carnage has the short net kind of effect, which can keep sorcerers from bubbling or shadows from vanishing. So that's another reason why I would rate Carnage slightly above Fury. But both specs are really close overall. Okay, moving on. Definitely above Carnage for me sits Rage Juggernaut right now. Rage Juggernaut has 8 out of 10 points for damage, 5 out of 8 for survivability, and on the utility side it's solid but not great. Utility-wise, I gave it 3 out of 5 points. It is, as far as I'm concerned, exactly the same as Vengeance. So yeah, lost its fear with 7.0, but it has, of course, taunts, can choose a lot of routes. It has Force Push and a hard stun. So it's a solid spec, and Intercede can always be helpful when used on your teammates. So 3 out of 5 for a total of 16 power points, putting it solidly in the top of B tier. Last spec in B tier, and the best of the sniper specs, in my opinion, is Engineering. Engineering, we all know how good the burst is. I gave it an 8 out of 10. There are better specs when it comes to sustained DPS, but the burst is just so insane. And the AoE is respectable. That for damage I rated very highly. Survivability is not as poor as some people might think, but you need to be a good player that knows how to play the class and be proactive on it. So I gave it a total of 5 out of 8 points for survivability. And when it comes to utility and peels, I rated on par with Virulence. I wasn't quite sure whether to give it 3 or 4 points here, but I think for the overall ranking it doesn't really matter. I gave it 3 in the end. It has the same tools as Marksmanship, but of course that on top it has the 50% spammable AoE slow, which is really great and just kind of creates a no-go zone for melees. And yeah, with a large radius like this, no cooldown on it, it's really a hard counter to most melee classes in the game, which is why I rate Engineering above Rage and as the best spec in B tier right now. Okay, so in A tier, there's actually only one spec right now, and it's AP PowerTech. AP PT has still great burst, and even though its single target sustain has been nerfed, it's still among the best damage specs in the game. I rated it for 8 out of 10 points when it comes to damage overall. However, survivability can be quite poor. Its lack of a combat reset makes it so that I can only give it 5 out of 8 possible points for survivability. However, when it comes to utility, in particular hard stuns, I gave it a perfect 5 out of 5. And that's, of course, due to all the things I already mentioned with Pyro, Carbonized Taunts, Pulse, and the spammable slows with suppressive tools. But if you've seen my other video, which I'll link in the description below, of course, the main reason why AP has crazy peels right now is the Neural Trigger Tactical. Neural Trigger gives you a 2-second hard stun on a 15-second cooldown. It doesn't respect the global cooldown. It has a 30-meter range, and it's just really good right now. And simply for that reason, even though, of course, AP cannot off-heal, I gave it a total of 18 power points, which puts it in the middle of A tier right now. Moving on, the 2 best specs in the game. If you've seen my other tier list, you will, of course, know what's to come. Second place right now in S tier sits Madness. Madness has solid damage, not the best, but I gave it a total of 7 out of 10 possible points for damage. Survivability, however, is very good. 8 out of 8 possible points. And when it comes to utility and peels, I also gave it a perfect 5 out of 5. When it comes to heals, Madness has, of course, a pull. It has insane off heals when it runs Volt Rush and the Stormsucker Tactical. Madness then, of course, also has the knockback route in Overload, and it actually can take Whirlwind a little bit more easily because it doesn't rely on Phase Walk as much. But yeah, Whirlwind is optional. However, Madness, just as Lightning, also has a hard stun baseline, which is really great and puts it many tiers above classes such as Arsenal right now. Then on top, something I rate very highly, Madness has rotational slows and even roots baked into its core rotation, which just makes it really annoying to deal with, especially if you're a melee player. For a total of 20 power points out of a perfect 23, Madness right now sits in S tier. Last but not least, the king of the hill, the best of the best. You have all seen my previous tier list and you will know it. It is, of course, the Lethality Operative. Now, Lethality in terms of utility has 30-second hard stun and an optional flashbang, just like Concealment. Now, most players will not go the flashbang route, but I think even without it, Lethality is a perfect 5 for 5 also when it comes to utility. It does have a passive slow, which is rotational on its grenade, of course, and you can talent into a 50% slow, which will also be rotational on your corrosive assault. But the main reason why Lethality is total 5 out of 5 when it comes to utility are its insane off heals. So with Lethality, you can do, 10,000 HPS pretty easily by just spamming your HOTS and rolling from time to time and then using the instant infusion. Your Lethal Strike increases the critical multiplier and critical chance of your HOTS by another 30%, which is just insane. And you can, if you really want to play Lethality like a healer, it's just really strong right now. Of course, hard stun is nothing to sneeze at, and you can slow the whole team by just spamming your dot grenade, which you will do anyway. So with a total of 21 points out of a totally possible 23 for a perfect score, I would give Lethality the crown right now. When it comes to survivability, again, watch my other tier list. I go a bit more in detail there. I gave it a perfect 8 out of 8. It's just incredibly tanky right now. And damage-wise, yes, single target, it's not the strong spec in the game. But with 8 out of 10, it's one of the top 4 damage specs in the game for sure. So a total 21 out of 23, Lethality sits atop of my list right now as the best spec in Star Wars PvP 7.2. That's it for today. If you have any questions, as always, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.